Nau Mai Haere and welcome back to another episode of the Holistic Human Podcast. My name's Amanda, and today I'm talking again with Mary Stewart Adams, a star lore historian and author of The Star Tales of Mother Goose, which is a family favourite in our home. And we're going to talk about the astrological forecast for the year ahead. We go deep into what Venus is up to. In particular, that part of the conversation stood out, and where the other planets are circulating and the relationships that they have to each other and how it might reflect what's happening down here on Earth. We also talk about how to carry on with the work that many have done over the holy nights, which were between Christmas Eve and the 6th of January, and how you can keep working with that impulse and keep it going and learn more about yourself and the universe throughout the year ahead. First off, I want to say a big thank you to Tanglewood Toys, who have generously sponsored this podcast. Not only do they sell some of my favorite Waldorfy products, but Felicity, who runs it, is so amazing with her partner Damon. They're just really genuinely nice people, and it's a small family owned business, and I think that it's really important that we support small businesses these days. So if you need some supplies for your homeschooling year, or gifts for your kids, or art supplies for yourself, I recommend checking out their website, which is tanglewoodtoys.co.nz, and you can follow them on Instagram at Tanglewood Toys. I also want to say a big thank you to those of you who have bought me a coffee over the past wee while. It's really helped. It goes towards paying the internet bill and paying for podcast hosting and stuff, so it's very much appreciated. So if you want to be one of those wonderful people, you can go to my Buy Me a Coffee page. The link is in the show notes. Or you can go to my Etsy shop, Silvercat Crafts, and buy some of my art creational things. Or just if you don't have the finances to do so, that's fine. I totally understand. Giving the podcast a 5-star review wherever you listen to it is super helpful. And if there's a place for you to write a review, please do so, because that's how people find the podcast, and sharing it around with your friends. So further to the introduction to the podcast, it's really more than just an astrological forecast. I really value Mary and her willingness to share her insights from years of studying and working with Anthroposophy and Astrosophy. If you don't know what Astrosophy is or Anthroposophy is, I recommend you go back and listen to one of the first podcasts we did together, where she goes really in depth about the development of Astrosophy and how it is part of the anthroposophical movement and all of that stuff. Very worthwhile. She does give a brief intro in this episode, but if you want more depth, pause this episode and go back. I'll put the link again to that episode in the show notes. So I hope you enjoy it. Remember to like, share, subscribe, and give it a 5-star rating. I'd love to hear your thoughts. So come over to Instagram and join the Holistic Human community and where I post stuff about holistic human things, Waldorf education, parenting, art, music, thoughts that cross my mind. Yep, it's always nice to meet new people and connect. So yeah, without further ado, let's talk 2022. For those of you who don't know Mary, she's the author of this book, The Star Tales of Mother Goose. And she is a star lore historian who speaks a lot about the stars and tells stories on boats, or used to. You still do that, and was one of the founders of the Dark Sky. Is that what it's called?
Yeah, International Dark Sky Park. Yes.
Yeah. And has been on the podcast a few times to talk about astrosophy, astrology, and astronomy. And I have to say, Mary, that this book has turned into a favorite in our house.
That's so good.
This was under Phoenix's pillow, because at nighttime I leave him and he sits there and he calls them the star names, and he looks at all of these he hasn't quite gotten the concept that there are 12. So he's all of these, but he sits there and he's got a calendar next to his wall and he writes the name of his imaginary friends and what their star names are.
That is so beautiful. That's
it's so sweet.
That's what it could inspire. And so I'm happy to know that.
Oh yeah. And he just has it all the time. And I have to tell him to put it away because the lights are out and he needs to go to sleep. But we should have
made it glow in the dark.
You should. Oh, well, I'm glad you didn't, because otherwise he'd be up all night.
Right.
Yeah. So again, thank you, Mary, for being here. And how are you doing today?
I'm doing really well. There's an interesting rhythm that's culminating today that I'll talk about in a minute. So I think you'll find it interesting as well. But yeah, things are going pretty well.
Mm-hmm. So continue.
No, it's winter where I am. It's very, very cold. And actually in the Christian calendar today is the Feast of Saint Agnes. And tradition holds that the coldest night of the year is the eve of Saint Agnes. And last night it was truly very, very cold here.
So, wow.
Yeah.
Well, that's nice.
I don't know if that would be true in the opposite time of year for you, but it's an interesting tradition. And John Keats wrote a beautiful poem about it. So any excuse to read John Keats is good.
Yeah. Well, it was very warm last night. I went for a swim in the sea at like 7:00 and it was so hot. Perhaps it was one of the warmest nights for us. But yes, it's summer here, mid-ish summer. And I've just come back from a walk and it's very, very warm and it's only just after 9 in the morning. So nice to have this opposition happening.
Right.
So today we're not going to go too much into what astrosophy actually is. I might get Mary to speak a little bit about it for people who are brand new. But if you are wanting to go into more depth about it, we recorded a podcast about 1.5 years ago where Mary explains kind of the nuts and bolts, the 101 of how astrosophy relates to astrology and astronomy. And it might be worth listening to that first if you want a little bit of context. Otherwise, we'll just do our best to kind of semi-explain things and I'll ask questions as we go through to clarify stuff. But but this episode's really just about, I wanted Mary back because she did one last year, just looking at what the stars are doing with the year ahead. And I always find that's a really good thing to think about at the beginning of the year, to kind of have a picture in my mind of what the cosmos is doing. And just it helps me learn about astrology and the stars anyway, to kind of have a picture of what's coming and then kind of think about it as we move through it and how it plays out down here.
It is good to know ahead of time because our lives are the research project and the stars just point the way. They go, pay attention right here. And it's not necessarily required that you interpret what it's going to mean. It's just, that day when you get past it and you look back and you can say, all right, I can now perhaps try to discern Mars or Uranus or some astrological impulse that's operating, or a starry impulse, I would say. But you had given me some interesting points that you wanted to talk about. And I just have to say that this question about what is astrosophy, I really would like to answer it from where I am right now, because it occurs to me that astrosophy, or star wisdom in our time, really concerns itself with the macrocosm. And astrology, the way it's practiced today, is very much more about the microcosm. Whereas in former cultures, when the astrology was first being established, it was this macrocosmic experience of hierarchical beings that were speaking to the human being, but that's descended all the way now to the human being. And so astrosophy is concerning itself still with that picture, whereas the astrology seems more to be about one's personal life and one's personal self. And so in that respect, you could say that astrosophy is our relationship to the stars in a more universal way, which is like beyond the moon sphere, whereas astrology is about our personal lives within that moon sphere. So just to give context for how I'm thinking about it right now.
That's good. That's all we can speak to, really, what's happening right now.
Right, because I think it's a living, growing, developing, evolving. It's a relationship that human beings are having with the stars.
Mm.
So, to me, at least, you might meet others who would give you a very give you a more fixed definition, but I can't. It has to grow with me.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, and thinking back to that first podcast we did together when you talked about that, I did get a real sense that it's evolving and growing. It has been growing for a long time and changing as you learn new things, because we're always learning new things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, that's the beauty of it.
Yeah, that's life.
Yeah.
So do you feel like that's a good enough picture for what, the first question of what astrosophy is?
Yeah, I do. I feel like it's, what I have been learning for myself most recently is how to language and move between astrology, astrosophy, astronomy, tropical zodiac, sidereal zodiac, heliocentric, like how to keep track in my describing those things to someone who might be listening, that it's not easy to cross those boundaries. I mean, they're words, you can take them in intellectually, but to really make that motion, it's it's kind of like the realizing the earth is moving, right? Like we can't feel the earth moving, and we need it to be fixed. Like in the foundation stone meditation in the third panel, it's human soul, thou livest in the resting head. Like it's something is stilled so that we can come to consciousness. And when we're working with the stars, and particularly with different um, zodiacal systems or in different disciplines, and you're moving across those boundaries, the earth is definitely not still. Like you're having to move.
Yeah, true.
It can be challenging. It's exciting, but it can be challenging.
Mm. Mm. So if when we're talking today, when we talk about the placements of the planets and the stars and all that kind of stuff, what system will you be
I
referring to?
will. So I will identify it as I'm speaking about
Oh,
it.
okay.
Probably mostly tropical, but what's starting to happen for me is that, and I think it also belongs to my age. I'm 58, almost 59 now. I've been studying the stars since I was 18,
Mm.
and I have been more and more growing into the sidereal relationship. And
Mm.
so, but I will identify which I'm speaking of when we get to that.
Cool. Cool, cool, cool.
Yeah.
Well, shall we get
Yeah,
into
let's Yeah. So you had asked me kind of a star review of 2021.
it? Mm.
And
Yeah. It's a bit broad, isn't it?
well, right. And I'm not going to do the whole thing, but I
No.
think one of the things that an important takeaway is that every year we have 2 eclipse seasons. And
Mm.
in 2021, the first eclipse was in June, and the shadow of it was a solar eclipse, and it went right over the North Pole. And then at the beginning of December, 6 months later, the shadow of the eclipse went over Antarctica. And so we had this eclipsing at the very top and almost the very bottom of the earth. So there's something about that just phenomenologically that says this is like a thorough experience, like the entire world. And you can just look into our time and say, all right, humanity has been brought together through a single experience, that even though in different nations and even within the nations, people are responding differently, it's something that all of us are being called to pay attention to.
Mm.
And so with solar eclipses, it's like a release. And so I think that even though things can seem really challenging, the eclipse helps to ease it. So it's not as challenging as it would otherwise be.
Mm.
So that was one of the first things. And then also in 2021, we had Saturn and Jupiter, which had made their once every 20 years great conjunction in 2020. Now they were pulling apart from one another, and Jupiter moving on and kind of regaining itself. When Jupiter comes together with Saturn, there's a little bit of it's a little bit confined. It wants Saturn to grow, and Saturn wants to hang on to it. So we have this meeting of, esoterically, you could say, the cosmic memory represented by Saturn, and those things that we are bound to encounter, that we can't escape, that we have to deal with. Whereas Jupiter has to do with cosmic intelligence and wanting to grow with idealism toward the future. And so when they come together, it can be a little unsettling, but it's also the mark of a generational impulse. So the last Saturn and Jupiter conjunction was in the year 2000.
Oh, yeah.
And if you look at what was going on in the world, you can say, okay, well, at least in the United States, there was the events of September 11th in 2001 that really changed things a lot in terms of security and travel, and just a lot of different things changed at that time. There's also the introduction of social media. You know, there was no Facebook before at that time. There was no Twitter and TikTok and all these things that now are really pervasive in our culture. So we can see that kind of coming out of that 20-year cycle, that with the last Saturn and Jupiter conjunction. And then this one, you know, we're still quite close to it, but we can see that it isn't like an event like 9/11, but now we have this global pandemic. And this will change. Again, it changes the ways we relate in the day-to-day for the next, you know, potentially for the next 20 years. Not that the pandemic is going to hang around that long, but the change that's wrought by this meeting of these two planets is something that we're going to be experiencing. Also, from the work of Jonathan Hilton, who is an astrosopher, who bases his research in the work of Willi Zucker, the 2000 great conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter was in an area of the zodiac that sounded out the, you could say, the cosmic memory of the conversion of Saul at the gates of Damascus. Right. This is like a wake up. And then the one that just happened in December of 2020 is in the region of the zodiac that bears the memory of the great conjunction that happened in 6 BC, that is regarded as the sign or the star that the wise men of the East saw, that in part indicated to them that this incarnation was to take place. So you could say that this most recent conjunction has the mood as of an annunciation or even an invitation to become aware. Something is trying to birth in the consciousness of humanity. So just kind of to get a sense of that. But then also, I've been reading and studying Rudolf Steiner's lecture from 1909 called Rhythms in the Being of Man. He describes in this lecture about how the ego of the human being comes back to its starting place after one cycle of being awake and being asleep. So in one 24-hour cycle, the ego comes back to the place where it started, and that's the rhythm of one. But then that the astral body is moving much slower, and that it repeats only after 7 days. So it comes back to the place where it started after 7. And then the context that he's giving for this is discussing illness in particular, because around the 7th day, there can be something critical that happens. I think he's talking about pneumonia and the fever. And there's something that happens in the relationship with the astral body on that 7th day that's really important. And then the etheric body, he describes as moving even more slowly, and its rhythm is 4 times 7, which gives us 28 days. And then when he describes the rhythm of the physical body, he says it's a little bit more difficult, because it's roughly 4 or 10 times. How does he do it? He does 4 times 7, which is 28 times 10, 280 days, or 9 months. But what's really interesting to me right now today, so for me, it's still the 21st. I think for you, it's the 22nd. Is that right?
That it is.
So today, on the 21st of January, we are 28 days from December 24th. So this is the beginning of the Holy Nights. So every year.
This is the beginning of the Holy Nights.
No, the beginning of the Holy Nights was December 24th.
Oh, yeah.
So from December 24th until January 6th, then you add 28 days and you arrive at January 21st to February 3rd. And so the etheric body has come back to the place where it was when we were doing that Holy Nights activity. So it's a really important rhythm to pay attention to, because most people probably that are listening observed the Holy Nights. And it's not that long ago. in order to kind of try to access what were you doing? What activity did you get involved in that might be showing up in a certain way now that begins to teach us the language of the etheric?
Mm.
And now what happens in the festival cycle or the feast days is that on January 25th every year, we have the Feast of Paul's Conversion at the gates of Damascus. And this is significant because Rudolf Steiner points to this experience of Saul of Tarsus, who becomes Paul.
Mm.
He's the first being that is experiencing the etheric Christ. So this is happening 28 days after the Holy Night's time. Now this feast day is placed here where we have this being that's the first one to encounter the etheric Christ. So this, I think, is really, really significant. So to look back, what did I do day by day through that Holy Night's time? And then how does that sound through this etheric rhythm that now is going to carry us forward? Also, I mean, you can keep going, but particularly this year, 4 28-day cycles from Christmas will get us to April 15th, which is Good Friday in the Holy Week. So now you can say, all right, I'm taking this activity that I did during the Holy Night's time and see how does it live through this season. For you, it's the summer. For me, it's the winter. But live through this season as a weaving of etheric forces, which are where now, through the work of Rudolf Steiner and spiritual science, we learn that this is where the Christ being is working. So I think this is really, really significant. And it's worth paying attention to and thinking about, because a 28-day rhythm is really a beautiful one to work with.
So can I ask you a question about that?
Yeah, please.
So if you've got the 28-day rhythm, you know how on the 12 holy nights we go through, obviously each night, for some of us, we're doing the zodiac, so each zodiac sign.
Yes.
So would you say that each 28-day rhythm we could be reflecting on, like moving through the holy nights? So if this one is about Capricorn, then the next 28-day rhythm would be, or whatever it is that you started with, the next 28-day rhythm would be Aquarius, and then the next 28-day rhythm would be,
I mean, you could do it that way. Me personally, what I would say is that I like to be more free so the thing itself can show itself.
Oh, okay.
And as you're pointing out, everybody uses a different starting point. So not everybody starts with Capricorn on the first holy night. And also not moving in the same direction. So for instance, what I did this year was to say, all right, the first holy night, we'll start with the season of the harvest in the cycle of the year, because that's the time of Virgo in the northern hemisphere, and it's the pregnant virgin that gives birth in that first holy night. And then we review. So we go from Virgo back through the year. So Virgo first night, Leo second night, Cancer third night. But then in anticipating the year ahead, you don't begin with the harvest. You start with the spiritual new year, which begins in Pisces, and go forward. So what we were doing this year with the group that I worked with, we started with Pisces, Virgo, and then moved in opposite directions. And really about strengthening etheric forces, because you're having to change your perspective, looking back and looking forward. And this is really good for the etheric body. And now here we are 28 days later. And so for me, it's not so much about trying to pick up Virgo and say, okay, is this about that? It's more, I committed to meeting with a group of people at the same time every day for the same amount of time. And we were striving together to realize something. And does anything of that show itself right now? It may or may not be connected to Virgo, but it can start to sound, what I'm looking for is, can I sense my etheric body, the etheric nature, the etheric Christ? That's what I'm looking for. So it's deep research, and it's looking into one's own biography. And it means looking back in a way where it really starts to inform like how you would journal. Because what you want to do with journaling is create a journal that allows you to recreate the day that you've gone back to. So if I want to go back and think about December 24th, what did I need to write down in my journal that will allow me to recreate that day in my memory so that I can go, I remember? Because the etheric is the memory body.
Mm.
And so I'm trying to strengthen that. And so in my journaling practice, it's not, here's how I felt, or here's how it's more like, what events took place that day? And then it lends itself to practicing I think it's the Wednesday Mercury teaching in the Eightfold Path about discerning between the trivial and the significant. And so to journal that way, like I'm really trying to learn what is the significant thing that happens on this day. I have a particular practice. It may or may not be aligned to what's actually occurring, but I make a beginning. And then in a rhythmic regularity, I reflect back on that. And if I do it in a 28-day rhythm, it's addressing that etheric rhythm, and I can start to, I can recall that day. I can remember that. It starts to strengthen that.
I like that. That's
yeah. And then the Holy Night's work keeps sounding. I mean, it does anyway, but it starts to get more formed. And then, there's other planetary things that are happening that kind of give it nuance. And I'm happy to go into that if you're ready, or if you have other questions,
yes,
let me know.
please. I do have one question though. What do you mean by the spiritual New Year is in Pisces?
So prior to the Julian calendar, so Julius Caesar was the one actually who established January 1st as New Year's Day. But prior to, and even during his own time, New Year was always celebrated in the spring, the beginning of the spring, at the time of the equinox. And so in our era, the sun is coming to its point of equinox in front of the stars of Pisces. And at the time, there were only 10 months in the calendar. January and February were not months. They were just kind of this period after the Saturnalia where there was just this long time of rest and purging and praying and fasting and waiting for the spring moon. And then we got the establishment of the January, the new year, and then January and February become the last 2 months in the cycle of the year. But then when you start to celebrate January 1st, I said that in a kind of a crooked way, but January 1st, when it becomes New Year's Day, then January and February become the first 2 months of the year. And so in part, you could see so March 25th, at least in the Christian tradition, was the new year, because this is the feast of the Annunciation of Gabriel to Mary. So Dante starts his Divine Comedy on March 25th. And so this Annunciation happens, and 7 days later, one octave is April 1st. So this becomes April Fool's Day, because if you're still celebrating March 21st as the beginning of the new year, then you're kind of a fool. Like, the new calendar system has been instituted. So it's just looking at how our calendar system is not as fixed as we think it is. And then when Rudolf Steiner introduced the calendar of the soul in 1912, he established a moving calendar that begins every year on Easter. And in 1912, this is the decade when the Gregorian calendar, which had been established in 1582, but it took almost 400 years for it to become the universal civic calendar in the 19-teens. So at the same time that we're getting this universal civic calendar that fixes January 1st as the beginning of the new year, it doesn't adjust its starting point relative to the Easter mystery. Rudolf Steiner introduces the calendar of the soul, which does adjust with that mystery. It's really, really fascinating. And he says that this is undertaken because in something that's fixed, you have the forces of death. But in something that's moving and living, it requires of us to keep finding our connection, that has the forces of life. And I think this belongs then also to this etheric rhythm of the etheric body. So it's 28 days, which is not aligning itself, it's not just 30 days. It's, you're having to continually adjust and add and find out, where am I?
Yeah, it's very, what's the word? Participatory. You're an active participant in time. aren't you?
Right. And it's one's own biographical experience. Like what's happening in my life that's showing me that this course of time really does have a relationship to my other bodies. Like, is
Mm,
it so? Can I find that etheric rhythm? It's really exciting. I mean,
yeah.
it's this is the subject.
Mm,
Right? I got to begin like right where I am and look into the experience I'm having, and then try to find that rhythm.
mm.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah.
So, um, did you want to talk about before I asked you that question? You said, "Do you want me to go into that?" And I said yes, and now I've
Oh
blanked.
yeah, I was so there's other planetary aspects that are sounding out in that. And
Oh
I
yeah.
guess because we had talked just a little bit about 2021, one of the things that I think is really interesting about 2022 phenomenologically
Mm.
is that when we get to the end of February, none of the planets will be visible in the evening sky.
Is that
And so
normal?
usually they're not, it's not always like that.
Huh.
But because Saturn and Jupiter are so close, still, they're in kind of in the same region of the sky. And then if they catch up with everything else, or everything else catches up with them,
Oh, yeah.
then we're getting them on one end of the day. And so
Mm.
in 2022, it's really only Mercury that's going to poke up a few times into the evening sky. Everything else will be in the morning sky.
Mm.
And it's just, to me, that gives a mood of saying, okay, all of the forces, all of the planetary energies are about taking initiative and leading. It's the sunrise mood of the day. And
Yeah.
it isn't until we get to August that then Saturn starts to show up in the evening sky. And then I think in October, Jupiter will show up, and then Venus will become the evening star. But that's all at the end of the year. So I feel like well, for us, it would in the Northern Hemisphere, summer solstice. For you, it's winter solstice. It's like at the end of the day, it's just us. There's no
Mm.
like planetary bodies that are there. And this is just kind of imagining what might that be as a gesture of where they're all aligned. And
Mm.
so I think that's also something to think about with 2022, that it really has these forces for taking initiative. It depends on where the sun is in the horizon, whether Venus is going to be exposed during an eclipse. But I always think of a solar eclipse as an unveiling of Venus, because the sky will darken during solar eclipse, and then the brightest objects around the sun in the sky will become visible, and Venus is the brightest thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so on December 4th, there was this total solar eclipse that went over Antarctica. And
Mm-hmm.
so we can imagine this as a moment in Venus's cycle when it's unveiled. And then on December 11th, Venus met Pluto. So Pluto is astrologically interpreted as being related to the ancient mythological god of the underworld and about transformation. And so when Venus meets the god of the underworld, you can easily imagine this is like a story of Persephone, who's
Mm.
taken really against her will into the underworld. And then on the 19th of December, Venus started its retrograde. And today, where you and I are talking on the 21st, Venus is still in its retrograde motion. And then on Christmas Day, because Venus met Pluto and then moved on, started its retrograde on Christmas Day, it met Pluto again. But now it's Christmas. And so rather than this calling to mind the story of Hades, Pluto's abduction of Persephone and taking her into the underworld against her will, now we have this birth of the Christ child. And the seed is planted for a redemption of the fall of humanity, you could say, through this sacred birth that takes place. And Pluto's energy is very much about total transformation. So whereas the planet Uranus has the energy of wanting to instigate change, it doesn't complete the change. Pluto does that. All right,
Ah,
so this
okay.
first meeting, which you could say is about like a loss of virginity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Second meeting, which is about kind of the potential for the restoration of virginity, or the sacred estate of being human. Not that, um, the virginity in relationship to being aware of self as a spiritual being,
Mm.
like having fallen out of the consciousness of the divine into the physical material world only, but now this beginning through the Christ impulse, a beginning of being able to restore that consciousness. So
Mm.
then Venus moved on. still in its retrograde, excuse me, and met Mercury. So Mercury is escort of souls, and he's psychopompous. And so it's just this really interesting picture of now Venus has met Pluto a second time, and now Mercury is going to escort Venus across the threshold of the new year. And then on January 8th, Venus came conjunct the sun. So if we looked in the mythological picture, this is kind of like the meeting with Zeus, where it's determined, okay, Venus is going to have, Persephone has to spend 1/3 of every year in the underworld. Or you could imagine it that this is a time where something is being prophesied, like Simeon when he prophesies over the Christ child and says to Mary, you know, a sword shall pierce thy soul, that the thoughts and the hearts of many shall be revealed. Excuse me, get a little bit of water. So I'm just looking at trying to find, you know, what is a picture that lives behind what's happening with these planets. So now Venus is still retrograde, but in a few days, Venus will turn direct. And that will happen on the 29th of this month. So January 29th. And then in the middle of February, Venus meets Mars. And Mars becomes like the companion, the escort. In the mythology, Mars and Venus are illicit lovers. But if you think about it in the Christian story, this could be Mars is like Joseph, or Mars is like the being of John, who's at the foot of the cross when the Christ being says to, you know, woman, behold thy son, behold thy mother. And then he lives with her after that. They travel to Patmos and to Ephesus. And so I'm looking at this, you know, kind of this mighty narrative, trying to imagine, is this what's sounding out in the cosmos toward us right now? To really, you know, Venus is looking into the heart of the human being to see what lives deeply there. This is Rudolf Steiner from The Spiritual Individualities of the Planets. He's giving this description of Venus about 5 months before the Christmas conference. So he's talking about all of the planets. And with Venus, he says, Venus is looking directly into the heart of the human being. That's what interests Venus. And so I'm going to digress for just a moment and share that when the Christmas conference started on December 24th, it was then the 25th where he first spoke the foundation stone meditation. And at the moment that it began, Venus was rising in the east. And it's always described that this meditation is laid into the heart of the human being. So I really believe that since that time, those who align themselves to an anthroposophical path are in a certain unique relationship with Venus, in that that foundation stone is there in the heart, and Venus is witnessing that. So as we look at what Venus is doing in the course of a particular cycle, I'm always paying attention to that. Can I find some way that that's connected? So after Venus and Mars meet in the middle of February, then Venus and Mars together will come conjunct Pluto. And now this is the third time that they're meeting, Venus and Pluto. So Pluto's wanting to come to complete transformation. So what I would be looking at in my own life, and it's not always easy to find Pluto, but to look at what was happening around the 11th of December when Venus and Pluto first met, what was happening on Christmas when they met the second time, and then what can I see or discern on March 3rd when they meet the third time. And that will be at the beginning of the Lenten season, coming toward the end of the winter in the Northern Hemisphere, coming toward the end of your summer. And so I think that this is really an interesting sounding out that's happening with the planet Venus. I want to make sure that the connection is good, because it looks to me like your screen keeps freezing. Is mine freezing for you?
You freeze every now and then, but it doesn't really disrupt what you're saying.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, good.
Yeah.
All right. So Venus, and this is why I asked you if it's okay to get pretty esoteric, because then when you look, so Venus will make, over an 8-year period of time, Venus will make 5 retrograde loops. And then in the 6th one, it will come back to the place where it started.
Yeah, right.
Of all the planets, they all go retrograde, but Venus goes retrograde the least amount of time. So in these 5 retrogrades that Venus makes, if you connect either the superior conjunction points or the inferior conjunction points, you get a 5-pointed star. So the pentagram, which is you could say, the architectural form that informs the pentagon, which itself informs the dodecahedron, which again points to the foundation stone itself. It's a 12-sided double dodecahedron. So a regular dodecahedron has 12 flat surfaces, and every surface is a pentagon. And so it's five points. And when Venus is making its retrograde loops over the period of 8 years, it describes the points of that pentagon. Right. So this is a really beautiful experience of how we can have this harmonious gesture of the planets in their apparent motion around the Earth. It looks to us like they're going around us. We know that they're not, but our concept doesn't match our percept. So we see this pattern. So an 8-year cycle of time, during an 8-year cycle of time, Venus will complete one pentagram. So from January 8th of 2022 until January of 2030 is 8 years. So from now for the next 8 years, Venus is going to create this pentagram. In 2030 just so happens to be mark the 100-year point from the decade when Rudolf Steiner first said that the Christ and the etheric would become an experience that human beings were having on the Earth. So he gives these lectures in 1910, and he says this is going to start to happen in the 1930s. So now we're 100 years down the road from this like sublime mystery that only Rudolf Steiner spoke about in the 20th century. There were no other spiritual leaders that were speaking about this mystery. But so what I'm looking for in this is, all right, so how can I prepare myself or research in such a way that I can become aware that this is actually occurring? So it's not just, oh, it's going to pop up one day in front of me. And it might be like that. But what I've got to do is strengthen my etheric body because it's happening in the etheric realm. So now I go back to looking at this 28-day rhythm. Like, okay, this 28-day rhythm of the etheric body becomes more and more important all the time. And Venus is connected to right memory, and it's the memory body. And so looking in these rhythms and trying to discern what is the mood, what is the gesture, what is the golden thread that's weaving through this day that I can find connected to what was happening 28 days ago, and build and build and build as the planets are weaving. I mean, I feel like this is spiritual practice and exercising the etheric body. So Venus is really sounding out that in the next 8 years, we'll be creating this. You know, you think of I think of Leonardo da Vinci's Vitruvian Man standing, with arms outstretched and legs outstretched. And really you can articulate that 5-pointed star that informs this human being. Or you could think of Rudolf Steiner's sculpture of the representative of humanity, which has, the arm is upraised and the right arm is down and stepping forward. So rather than in this static pose, it's very much engaged. And so I think that that's a gesture that lives behind our experience of this mystery of the movement of the planet Venus now. So this is, I feel like this is big work. It's good stuff to be aware of. And again, to just research in one's own life and to pay attention, like, what is it? So for myself, I'll remember that today you and I had this conversation. 28 days from now, when I'm looking back, I'll see this. And what are the circumstances that surround this event taking place between us? And is something sounding in my life that belongs to our doing this now? 28 days ago, I was hosting each day a 15-minute contemplation of the new images of the zodiac, day by day by day, through the holy nights. So I'm looking at, okay, how is this connected to that? And then what comes from this going forward? So really just taking the experiences I'm having in my day-to-day and see that something is expressing itself in that. Yeah. Okay,
so well timed.
Right.
Right?
We weren't going to do this day originally.
No, but it all worked out. Far out. That's so great.
It all worked out. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. Those kinds of things are exciting to me because I keep really have kept a journal for a lot of years, like most of my life.
Mm.
And it is very important when, at least for the way I work with the stars, trying to find the rhythms and the meaning of what it is, I have to look into my own life and see, can I find anything that suggests that there is a relationship? And I can say definitely yes, but without having a record of my own life, I wouldn't be able to find it as easily.
That's so true. That's funny because only this year, when I've been doing the Holy Nights, which I've started a journal for, and I keep every year I have a journal, but I just throw it away because I'm just like, I don't want to remember, like some of the stuff that I write in them up until this point. I'm just like, oh, I came across a box of diaries or journals from when I was like 20 or younger, and I read through them. And I'm like, I don't want anyone to find this.
Right.
But then, like a year or so ago, I listened about biography work and how important it is to kind of keep a journal of, so you, just like what you said, because otherwise you forget stuff and you don't remember what day things happened. But yes, I will start keeping journals now, but I'm just like, yeah, up until this point, I just couldn't face.
Well, here's the interesting
thing. It's too emotional.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing, because it's what you're writing down.
Yeah.
Like you have to be really discerning about, well, what will allow me to recreate that day in my memory? It's not that I want to go back and feel that way again.
No.
But what were the events that happened so that when I try to remember, it comes. And so if you don't, so say you're not an astrologer, you're not an astronomer, you're not an astrosopher, you don't have an ephemeris, you don't know what the planets are doing, but you can count 28 days and say, okay, I'm looking for an etheric rhythm. Or in the 7-day rhythm, which is the astral, one of the ways, and again, this gets a little bit esoteric, but one of the ways I've been thinking about it is that when Rudolf Steiner gave the foundation stone meditation, it was over a period of 7 days. So that's the astral rhythm.
Yeah.
And in the first sounding out of the first panel is to practice spirit recalling. So you could say that this has to do with the memory, and the memory body is the etheric. So it's not inappropriate then to say, okay, in a certain respect, that first panel is about the etheric body. The second panel is the call to spirit awakening. It is addressing the Christ being, and this has to do with egoic forces. So that's the ego body. And then you could say with the third panel in its call to practice spirit beholding, that this is about looking toward the future or into the future. And I'm imagining that then that belongs to this rhythm of the physical body, which we have a conception at a certain point, and then 280 days later or 9 months later, which is the normal length of time for a human gestation, something is born out of what I've conceived there, right into the physical. And it doesn't have to be a physical pregnancy. So when I think, so the first panel could be, in a certain respect, imagine a relationship to etheric body, second panel to the ego body, third panel to the physical body, and that these were given in a rhythm of 7, which is the astral. So there's this really beautiful architecture in the foundation stone meditation itself that also supports this kind of contemplation of one's life. So looking in the 28-day rhythm, memory body, etheric, the daily rhythm, egoic forces, the 7-day rhythm, the astral forces. So without having to know what are the planets doing, but then you can, then you can start to look at the moon, look at different things.
Yeah, it's such a good starting point, isn't it?
Yeah.
It feels very much like the Waldorf school curriculum, where you just start with the being of the child, like you start with that and then you move outward, and at 9 you do kind of like home geography, and then you go further and further and further until you're mapping the world when they're older.
Right.
It's
really foundational. It comes from the foundation of being. And so I feel like that's, as an adult looking into one's biography, it's like I'm looking into the foundation of my being. And as this biography unfolds, what I'm experiencing is not just mine, it's these rhythms, physical, etheric, astral, egoic. And I can find that to the extent that I can pay attention to this life in a way that isn't just about the personal self. So, yeah.
In that practice, you'd also, I imagine, you just kind of learn to become far more open-minded.
Yes.
In a way too. It's funny because you're very deeply delving into yourself, which is very self-orientated, but at the same time, you're aware that your experience is quite different from other people's as well, and that everybody else will have their own self. And you get this like lovely twofold empathy of knowing yourself and knowing the other. Well, not knowing the other, but accepting that the other's got their own truth as well.
Well, and also to say that I'm not looking at my life, but I'm looking at this human life.
This human life.
This is a human life. It's not it's a human life. So to develop as much objectivity as I can about the experiences that are unfolding in this biography. And I've been given this, an intimate front row seat of life experiences from this biography.
Yeah.
And if I can get to that state of objectivity, then there's a certain revelation of the karmic necessity that's operating in this biography.
Very much so.
Because that also is living in the memory body. I have access in my day wake to about that much of it, But if I can start to think in these rhythms, it really develops an ability to become more objective and then to become aware. So
awesome.
Yeah. We can go back and talk more about planets.
Yeah. How are you feeling, by the way? Let me know when you're starting to feel a bit tired. And
okay.
Yeah.
Good.
The planet that I also really wanted to touch on, I think we've touched on it in the past, but I just feel like the old Mercury retrogrades get such a bad rep. And you did that post on Instagram about it being cyclical, which I'd never really thought about before. And so I don't know, is that a planet that we can talk about?
We can. The Mercury retrograde is just one part of the cycle. And so to really understand Mercury, you have to look at what is it doing in relationship to the sun from our perspective on the earth. It goes around the sun. So you could say at the beginning point of its cycle, it's on the other side of the sun from the earth. Then it races around, it starts its retrograde loop, and then it's between earth and sun. Then it continues on, it races ahead of the sun, then it gets to the other side again. And as messenger or communicator, Mercury is carrying messages back and forth. So not just what the divine spiritual is saying to us, but what we are saying back. And it's not just what we are saying to each other, but what is our engagement with the spiritual world, just kind of this back and forth through the Mercury sphere. Mercury is also connected to the moral nature of the human being. And also Rudolf Steiner points to it in relationship to contagion and to, to our experience of illness. The staff of Mercury is, well, I want to be cautious about the way I say this. The Archangel Raphael is the angel of healing. And I think he wields the staff of Mercury. So Mercury is definitely connected to healing forces. So when we look at a Mercury retrograde cycle, it's good to not get uptight, like, oh, just wait till it's over, because it's really a fertile time. And particularly when we get to the inferior conjunction of Mercury with the sun, which for us will be happening over this weekend. So that can be a moment of real clarity and real openness and opportunity. So I think that because of social media, Mercury gets a bad rap now when it goes retrograde. And so we just have to look at the things that kind of get flummoxed by Mercury, like with communication, as something is saying, psst, pay attention right here. And Mercury is a trickster god. I used to, when I was leading programs at the International Dark Sky Park, whenever I was going to talk about the Mercury retrograde, I would make people tell me jokes ahead of time. Because I'd be like, I can't unveil the secrets of Mercury unless there's something we have to give Mercury something.
Yeah. I love the jokes.
Let's amuse the god of communication. Let's
yeah. I like that.
Veil and see what's going on.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah, so Mercury usually does 3 retrogrades in a year. And like I said, Mercury of all of the planets is really the only one through the spring and the summer in the northern hemisphere. So that will be autumn and winter for you. That's going to be poking up into the evening sky. So yeah, there's just, what is that? It's kind of like, psst.
Yeah. Boop.
yeah. And then down it goes. And depending on what latitude you are, like I'm pretty far north. I'm 45 degrees north. It's not always easy to see Mercury above the horizon.
Right.
So it's kind of tricky.
Yeah.
But I think playfully.
Yeah. That is interesting that it's the only one that peeps his head over into the evening. But apt that it's the god of communication and the messenger god. It's almost like it's peeping over into the evening to see what it needs to communicate down below, or do you know what I mean? It always needs to know what's going on everywhere.
Always. Yes.
Yeah.
Very, very not nosy, but interested.
Yeah. Nosy, or just like a gossip or needing to know everybody's business.
Yeah. And of necessity. I mean, because Mercury is the closest to the sun, and Mercury does have to keep that. It's like keeping it informed.
Yeah, totally.
And also, there are forces streaming from humanity into the spiritual cosmos, and Mercury is carrying them sunward. And in a certain respect, you could say that when we have this like big explosion of coronal mass ejections and sunspots, that rather than that being something that's erupting from the sun, it's actually what we're sending toward it. When we see that like it's like a reception by the sun of what we're sending.
Oh yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
So is there anything else that you want to talk about with Mercury this year, or just in?
No, I mean, I just, the retrogrades, we're in a Mercury retrograde right now. The next one will come at the end of May into the beginning of June. And then after that, we have end of September, right around the time of Michaelmas. And then that's it for the year. We'll have 3 this year.
3.
And I guess it's a time, because it is communication, it could be a time that you set aside to say, okay, I'm going to do my review. I'm going to look back. And if you can avail yourself of the dates when the superior conjunctions happen. So it does several stages. First, it meets the sun, and then it comes into the region of the zodiac that it's going to back up over. So that's called its ingress. Then it starts the retrograde, and then it'll go back over that same period. It'll meet the sun, keep going, and then it goes direct again. So it hits one region of the zodiac 3 times each year. So that's a pretty thorough going.
Yeah. It's like if you've got a paper to sign or something, you've got that lawyer that comes and looks at it back to front until you're like, yes, you're ready to sign and move on or something.
And then when it goes direct and it goes a 3rd time over the spot where it was retrograde, then it gets to the end of that, and then it leaves the shadow called its egress. So ingress, and it backs up, then it goes direct, then egress, and then the next thing is it's meeting the sun again in superior conjunction. So this time when it's in that kind of almost like a pendulum swinging back and forth over one spot, you do pay attention to your communication, pay attention to messages that you receive, ideas that come, things that would be associated with this fleet-footed messenger, but also health and well-being, and what sounds in the I think it's a little bit more difficult to get a hold of, but in the moral nature, and perhaps the way to look at it, that I would look at it, is like starting at the level of world leaders, what message are they really carrying that can strengthen or weaken the moral capacities of nations and peoples? Because it's not for nothing that they end up in those places. Even in democracies, when we have the right to vote, these individuals have a particular karmic destiny that belongs to this time in a way that is perhaps potentially more pronounced than somebody who's not going to be that visible on a global scale.
Good point.
Yeah.
Cool. So, did you want to talk about any other planet? Did you want to go through all of them, or just particular ones?
Not all of them. We can talk about Jupiter, as it's pulling away from Saturn, is going to have some lovely encounters in April. It will meet first Neptune, and that will be on April 12th, which is just so happens to be Tuesday of the Holy Week. It's kind of, Jupiter meeting Neptune. Neptune is really a diffuser of boundaries, and Jupiter is very large. And so I've heard this described as like a refilling the well. Right. And so, but it could also be a flood of emotions, so really to pay attention to that. But this is, whereas Jupiter and Saturn's wanting to hold, Jupiter would just continue to grow, but Saturn's orbit is beyond Jupiter's, and it's kind of holding it in.
Yeah.
Together, Saturn has that gesture around Jupiter, whereas Neptune is like, let's just get rid of all the restriction and just let it grow. Let it grow. So that's coming. And then a few weeks later, on April 30th, then Jupiter is going to meet Venus. So Venus, goddess of love and beauty, who, if we, follow this imagination of this sounding out of the unveiling, what lives in the heart, and recognizing what experiences have we gone through that belong to coming to consciousness, which could be described as a fall. And then how do we restore that consciousness in a way that has integrity and wholeness in it? Not that it lacks integrity to fall into consciousness, but just that, trying to pick up that thread of the story that I was weaving about Venus. And then after Easter, it's going to meet Jupiter. And so now it's more about love and beauty. And astrologically, usually a conjunction of Jupiter and Venus is kind of described as an indulgent time.
Oh.
So it seems like April is going to be really much lighter and freer. So first with Jupiter, Neptune, then with Jupiter, Venus. And then when we get to May, Jupiter is going to meet with Mars. So this is really bold, really courageous, really feisty energy. It's really take charge. So Jupiter is kind of like growing. It's like filling up the well, then expression of love and beauty, and then let's just take hold. So much different mood for Jupiter than it's had in the last, 12 months.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
It's finally able to kind of go and do its thing with its friends.
Right. Right.
Rather than being grounded by Saturn.
Yeah. And then Saturn is completing a series of squares to Uranus.
Right.
And so this can be challenging because Saturn, again, wants to consolidate, and whereas Jupiter wants to grow and expand, Uranus wants to instigate change. And so it wants to innovate, and it wants to break free, it wants to break through. And so it's kind of like again, I've heard this described as like a major restructuring. And so this has been going on. It started last year in February, and then it came exact again in June, and then again on Christmas Eve. So 28 days ago. And then they'll come to their final square in this cycle I think it's in October. So mid-September through November is the period of time when we might be feeling this. So you'll be going toward greatest out-breath in the southern hemisphere. And in the northern hemisphere, we're coming toward greatest in-breath. I mean, I think that matters when we're thinking about when in the cycle of the year does an event like this take place. Because it's kind of the culmination of this series of squares that they've been having, and trying to find, like, to put it in the context of the news in the United States, like, is there a universal mandate for wearing masks or getting vaccinated or not?
Mm.
You know, Uranus would be like, I want to be free of that, and Saturn is like, you abide by the rules.
Mm.
But it seems that Uranus has the upper hand, and it's Saturn that has to change.
Yeah, right. Well, that's
Yes.
interesting in the context of New Zealand, where there is mandates and
Yeah.
stuff to keep your job and things for certain places.
Yeah.
But it'll be interesting to see how long that lasts. Again, it'll be interesting to see what down the line,
Yeah.
how that plays out.
So it's trying to discern how much of this belongs to the Saturn-Jupiter Great Conjunction that happened in December of 2020.
Yeah.
And how much of these things that are trying to fall into place belong to that whole generational impulse for 20 years, and how much of it is just this Saturn-Uranus standoff.
Mm.
You know, so it's not like it's kicking up anything new. Uranus doesn't get to bring something new because Saturn is saying, hold your horses, we got to, like, figure this out.
Yeah.
So it wants to,
Mm-hmm.
you know, it wants to change, but it can't destabilize the foundation too much.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
it can feel frustrating.
Mm. I've heard some people talk about this year being kind of just like a part 2 of last year, in terms of, like, there's kind of a lot of things just kind of following through, and then at the end of this year it's almost like the completion of a little bit of a 3-year 2-year cycle in a way. So I wonder if that's kind of related to what you're saying.
I think so.
Uranus, Saturn.
Yeah, because they're not done. They're not done wrestling with each other. So
No,
they wrestled
not yet.
last year, and
Yeah.
then it's come at the end of this year.
Mm.
And remember, we've got all the planets in the morning sky, so it's like, take initiative. We're trying to push forward, but something's saying, wait, we haven't figured it all the way out yet.
Yeah. Mm.
And then, in addition to that, we have the nodes. Now, in the tropical zodiac, the nodes are moving back into the region of Taurus. And this just happened.
Wait, what do you mean? What, just for those who don't know, what do you mean by node? Do you mean like the moon? Do you mean the moon?
Node of the moon is the point in space, 2 points in space that are described by where the plane of the moon's orbit intersects the plane of the Earth's orbit. Mm-hmm. So it's not an object, it's just a point in space that can be calculated mathematically. Mm-hmm. And the way it's understood astrologically is that it's like an opening, like a doorway. So if you imagine that as a human being, your point of origin is as a soul spirit being in the vicinity of the stars. And when the decision is made to take up earthly incarnation, which is described as the midnight of the soul, it's not just a depressing moment in life, it's actually an experience between death and rebirth. Mm. The decision is made to take up earthly incarnation, then gathering the formative forces for this body from the starry regions and then the rhythmic organisms through the planets, then the soul spirit being comes to, like, the moon sphere. And at the moment that you're born, it's as though you carry all of these forces from the celestial spiritual world right into the physical, and you bring it through the node, through that opening, that door that's open in this path that the moon is describing around the earth, kind of as a guardian. And so there's always 2 nodes, a south node and a north node. The south node could be imagined as what I'm bringing with me. The north node is what I intend to do with it. So they always stand exactly opposite each other. And I think it's cosmic poetry that they go in the opposite direction of all the planets when the planets are direct. So it's like they go around and scoop up the experience and rhythmically drop it off. So the node has an 18.5-year rhythm. At 9 years, it's exactly opposite where it was when it's beginning. Then in 18 years, it comes back to the place where it was when you were born. So there's another rhythm. You can just look in your life and go, all right, what's happening every 18.5 years? Is there something that stands out? But when the node moves from one sign to another, there can be a marked change in what's being stirred up, right? So when it was in the tropical zodiac in Gemini and Sagittarius over the last just a little over a year, you could say part of what was being stirred up had to do with the things that belong to Gemini and Sagittarius. So education, travel, schooling, things that Sagittarius really about the higher mind, Gemini about the day to day, so you can see what was going on. Like all these challenges around schooling, around travel, around, trying to sort out how is this going to work now?
Yeah.
Then when it moves into Taurus, now it's more about material goods and possessions, supply chain, things that we own. And then with the South Node in Scorpio, hidden things. It's about what's in the background, money deals, just so this is in the tropical zodiac. So this is not what's going on in the sidereal zodiac. So the microcosm as opposed to the macrocosm. But that started already. Let me give you the date. Just moved on the 19th. 2 days ago.
Also 2 days ago.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. But you're a day ahead of me. Right. So, and then the eclipses will happen when the sun is, when the moon is new or full close to the node. So this year, when we started, I was telling you about the eclipses that happened last year, but this year the eclipses are coming. There's 2 partial solar eclipses, one at the end of April, right at the same time when Jupiter and Venus are coming together, and then another one in September at the time of Michaelmas, around the 25th. And then we have 2 total lunar eclipses. And those I don't know if they'll be visible for you in New Zealand. They will be visible in North America. So the first is on May 15th to the 16th, and then the second is on November 8th. And so a lunar eclipse has to do with, the shadow and things streaming down in darkness. It's different than a solar eclipse, which is like a release. So seems like we'll have some stuff to deal with, to process, to digest, to compost, to turn over, to really, then you try to put all these pieces together. Like, okay, here's what the node is doing. Here's Jupiter making these meetings. Here's Saturn and Uranus still kind of struggling with each other. Got Venus kind of articulating this journey with Pluto. It feels like there's promise, but it might take a little bit more time than we would like.
Isn't that life?
Yes. Although then at the end of the year, Mars is going to go retrograde. And Mars goes retrograde once every 2 years. And that's the peak of its cycle. It's when it will come opposite the sun. And the exact point of opposition is going to be on December 8th. So almost a year from now. And that can be a time when things sometimes it can be overstimulating. There's a lot of action and activity, but it's not really directed easily because the god of action and activity is going backward. So it's not the cessation of the activity, but just that it's not as clear how to make it go forward.
Yeah.
So
how long does it last?
Let's see. The retrograde starts in October and goes to I wrote down the point of until January 12th.
Oh
yeah. So it's the entire from end of October all the way through Holy Nights, all the way across the new year into January.
Yeah. Where it's kind of a busy.
So I would be looking for a busy time of year, but then also what you can do is think about it ahead of time. So Mars and Venus are going to meet on February 16th.
This year?
So this year, 9 months later, or 280 days later, we're in November, and Mars will be retrograde. So already on February 16th, I can start thinking like, okay, I'll say it this way, what gifts pass between these two? And what can I do in my life that belongs to that, that is a gesture toward that, that says, you know, Mars or my own Mars nature, I'm going to need some of this Venus substance when I get to that retrograde. And then on March 3rd, Venus and Mars together meet Pluto. So this is the third meeting of Venus with Pluto through its retrograde, but Mars is right there. And then you go 9 months after that, that puts you at December, around December 3rd, which is just within a couple of days of Mars's exact opposition with the sun. So now you start to see like, oh, okay, across the year, there are these gestures that potentially belong to one another. So when I'm paying attention to what's happening on March 3rd and trying to discern, what is this in my life? You know, it's not always easy at the beginning to find it, but if you just make a beginning and then make a note to yourself, December 3rd, look back at March 3rd and see if you can see what's been happening. Because this is happening in the more subtle bodies. It's not necessarily evident in the physical, although the 280-day rhythm is in the physical body. So I would look for that, because it can help to allay some of the frustration. It helps it like feel like, oh, it's not stuff that's happening to me, it's happening through me. I'm participating in this in breath and this out breath, this going forward, this stepping back, and you know, not everybody's going to be retrograde when Mars is retrograde or when Mercury's retrograde, but you know, I can see what parts of my life and my being are moving forward, and what still needs to be resolved or held.
That's great advice. Is there any other planetary movements or events happening that you think we should discuss? Or do you think kind of...
Those are pretty much the highlights. That's the stuff that I'm looking at. You know, I didn't talk too much about Pluto apart from its relationship to Venus. I'm really, for me right now at this point in my life, when I look at and because I am an anthroposophist, and I look at the culminating 100-year rhythms that are that are upon us. So in 2022, we will be 100 years from the fire. In 2023, we're 100 years from the Christmas conference. And then in 2030, we're 100 years from this onset of this great mystery of our era. And so I'm really interested in looking at how can what is it that allows me to be in the best possible way participating in the culmination of those rhythms. So looking at Venus from now until 2030, it might seem like a really long time, but I can begin to it's like developing a deeper relationship. And it's also really beautiful in 2030 when Venus comes to meet the sun, it will be at Epiphany. You know, so it really has kind of this signature of there's something in it that's saying, yeah, this is the right thing to pay attention to.
The fire that Mary just mentioned is when the first Goetheana burnt down, by the way, for those who don't know.
Sorry.
No, it's all right. Which you can have a look up if you want to about that event. It's pretty major. But yeah, I love that. I like the idea of just using all of these things as a starting point for taking ownership of just the evolution that's occurring in your personal life and the Earth's evolution and everything, and looking at cycles from a bigger perspective. And making it, like you say, or like we've been mentioning today, far more participatory.
Yes.
Rather than it being, like you said, something that just happens to you and you have no control over.
Yeah, and what I look for then is like major works of art and literature by human beings who have wrestled with these things, right? Like Dante in his Divine Comedy. You know, he's really wrestling with crossing over the threshold and describing this inferno, and then the process of moving through the purgatory, and then the passage of the soul through the planetary spheres, and you know, it's not that you had to believe Dante, but how awesome that he was able to articulate that at that time. And or to even look at the chemical wedding of Christian Rosenkreuz. Are you familiar with that? And so on day 5, he inadvertently sees Venus. You know, there's this mystery of the unveiling of Venus, and in trying to get hold of a Venus rhythm over an 8-year period of time, it's like in a certain way unveiling Venus, and that will have consequence. You know, what happens for him each step along the way could be likened to those 7 days of the chemical wedding. You could apply to this Venus cycle from now until 2030. So you see the great conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter is like an invitation. And then this meeting with the Sun and Venus that just happened on January 1st, 2022 is like day 2 in the chemical wedding, which is when he's had to choose the path. He enters the castle, and now the tests are going to begin.
Yeah.
And then on day 3, there's the weighing. So that would be the next Sun-Venus conjunction that's happening. And then they get weighed. And, you know, some people have to be chased out. And then on the 4th day, they have this play, but then also there's the beheadings, which is really symbolically represents that, all right, human being, at this stage of initiation, now it's in your hands what happens. And then on the 5th day, when he sees Venus, it's as though what lives in the heart of the human being will fully be revealed. And then on the 6th day, he is elevated, but it's disguised as an expulsion. So this is a very interesting part of the path. And this is coming, if you apply it to the dates when Venus is making its Sun conjunctions, that would be in 2028, so 6 years from now. And when Venus meets the Sun, Mercury and Uranus will both be like within 1 or 2 degrees. Change, this is communication, this is what's living in the heart, and can we pass through this experience, which in the description in the chemical wedding, it's devastating to Christian Rosenkreuz that he's being kicked out.
Yeah.
And then the final one would happen on January 6th in 2030. And what happens at the end of the chemical wedding, he becomes the doorkeeper, which seems to be punishment, but actually it's, you know, he becomes the spiritual leader of humanity. The one that stands at the door and that can open the door. So I think that, to me, that's like really exciting. Like, oh, and then there's this kind of like this architecture and this structure that I can use to contemplate this my way through.
Yeah. It's so beautiful, so powerful, but daunting, but also just very exciting as well.
Yeah. I always go like, oh, 8 years from now. But at the same time, it's like, oh, well, these are some really important rhythms.
Yeah.
We are living, I think you could say that every age of humanity is significant, but this 100-year rhythm is, you know, you could also look at it as 3 33-year rhythms. You know, 33 and a third years.
Yeah.
And that's, it's really important in our consciousness soul age that we become aware of ourselves more and more and more, and really be able to speak about these mysteries in a way that doesn't exclude and enhances our capacity to be more human.
Yeah, I like that. So if we're done with the nuts and bolts of the year,
yeah.
If I think you might have mentioned it earlier, but I can't remember, if you were to like give this year a theme or a picture or something, do you have something that springs to mind?
Well, like I was just saying, I mean, I feel like it's you know, the fairy tale East of the Sun, West of the Moon.
Yeah.
It's like finding yourself in a sacred place, and the doors have opened. And when we enter, you know, in a fairy tale, when you enter the castle, now the tests are going to begin. And so I feel like that's where we are. Like you could say, oh, I thought 2020 was the test or 2021 was the test, but now we have this new reality. And so we've kind of all moved across this threshold.
Yeah.
And there are, and I don't say this lightly, but there are a lot of people who are leaving. You know, it's it's not without its challenges to be here right now and to find the way to be fully human, which includes coming together physically in shared space and having experience together. And so I feel like this year is recognizing that, oh, we're in the sacred space and we're going to be tested to see whether or not we know that we are.
Yeah, I hear that.
Yeah.
Good to have a good team by your side.
Yes, a good team, and also good like a good rhythm of self research. It's not egocentric to look at the rhythms in one's biography and to really say, okay, got to sort this out from right here.
Yeah. Gives you a good grounding to be able to move out into the world, doesn't it? And be with your team.
Yeah.
Be with everybody and make the difference that you need to make. Because there's so many messages you get bombarded by, you need to do this and this and this and this and this, or be this. But if you're doing this self-reflection and self-discovering, well, just what we've talked about today.
Yeah. And what happens is that it starts to, your being starts to resonate a certain way that then has consequence when you encounter others.
Yes.
You know, it can bring things to mind. It can, you know, it's not like you stand there and say, I have ideas for you, but just that the ideas that live in the other get the substance they need.
Yeah.
When I come into the presence of somebody who's really been doing their work, it inspires something in me. We don't ever even have to talk.
Yeah.
You know,
I hear that.
It's what passes between us.
Definitely. And I think it's something that I've always been, one of the reasons I think that I was drawn to Anthroposophy, and that I guess people are drawn to different spiritual movements, whatever it is, well, the external aesthetic of just, you know, a Waldorf school and stuff really appeals. But then I met all these like anthroposophists who were in their like 60s. I mean, I'm 35 and I came to it when I was about 26, or like in their, you know, 40s, 50s and 60s at that age. And they just had a way. And it was this warmth and openness. I think, I just haven't met in such a small group of people, because there aren't that many anthroposophists in the world at the moment. And then when you meet them in a room that, like you say, have been doing this work, and it's such like self-knowledge, but also awareness of the other. It's just, I was just like, oh, well, I want to be all of you when I grow up.
That's beautiful.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I mean, when you think about it, that there really are not that many anthroposophists in the world right now. And that there's a specific reason for having incarnated right now. And that I feel like it's that because we are in this threshold, specifically in 2022, we've crossed over that threshold. We're in the castle now. And Anthroposophy would be like a golden light that can shine into what would otherwise be dark. And it may seem outwardly like it's getting darker, but also spiritually it's getting lighter, providing we do the good work of it. And it's really exciting that way. This is there. And it's also deeply humbling that Rudolf Steiner's name is spoken in so many ways, and just that there was an individual on the earth that was able to bring this for humanity. Beautiful. And there aren't words to touch what that is.
It's very special.
Yes.
I'm very grateful for it all. And I'm very grateful for you for being here and sharing your wisdom. Every time I talk to you, I feel like I'm going to my own little esoteric school. Like I'm in a little initiation pod in my room via the computer, and I don't know, I feel like there's such a shift in me whenever I speak to you, and I'm really grateful for it. So thank you so much.
And I would like to honor the technology that allows us to have met.
Indeed.
Yeah. And I do still hope that one day I get to come down there to New Zealand and see your very dark skies.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. And the stars of the Southern Hemisphere.
Yeah. Well, you're always welcome when these borders open up and all that kind of stuff. You're always welcome down here. Yeah.
All right.
So yes, before we go though, do you want to tell people about what things you offer, if there's things online, or aside from your amazing book, which everybody should buy?
There is my book, and that's at a website called starlore.co. That's specifically for the book. But then I also have another website called The Storyteller's Night Sky. And on that, it's kind of like a blog, but what I do is I post my weekly radio program there. And then sometimes I will expand that. And so you can find all of that stuff there. And that's a much more active calendar about what I've got going on. I'm finishing a 12-month series that I've been doing for the Anthroposophical Society in America about the new images of the zodiac. And out of that project, my sister and I are creating a card set of those images, which originally appeared in the Calendar of the Soul, that will be available for sale through the Society in the United States, probably April. I'm thinking, hopefully sooner rather than later. And then, as you mentioned, I do have these summer cruises that I do. So if you're traveling to North America, I get out on the Straits of Mackinac and narrate the night sky, and that's a really beautiful experience.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah, and then I guess just immediately coming up, I'll be doing a talk for the Faust branch of the society that's there out west in California in February. And that would be available online to anybody that's interested. And it will be, again, about these rhythms in the being of the human being. And looking at, because that's what's really sounding for me right now. That's what's drawing my attention.
Yeah, great.
So, yeah. So Storyteller's Night Sky is the best way to find out what I got going on.
Cool. And you're on Instagram too?
And I'm on Instagram. I'm on Facebook, although not as much.
Yeah. Fair enough.
Yeah.
Just not feeling the drive. Are you on TikTok yet?
No, I'm not. I see it though. I have one friend in particular who posts the funniest, like reposts the funniest TikTok stuff. So I get my TikTok fix through her.
Yeah.
So do you play this game Wordle? Have you heard about Wordle?
No, but I've seen it referred to. What is it?
So you get five blocks, where there's five columns in 6 rows, and you have that many chances to figure out the word for the day.
Oh, okay.
So you just start with it has to be a 5-letter word, and then you'll get, like, you put your first word in, and then the tiles flip over, and it shows you whether or not you got any of the letters right. And then you try to figure out what word it is. It's a lot of fun. So
yeah, that sounds addictive.
It is, and unfortunately, there's only one word a day, so it's like, oh, darn it, now I gotta wait another 24 hours before I can do it again.
It's so cool.
Yeah.
It's good. Puts a little limit on you.
Yes, it does.
Yeah, cool. Well, I will let you go and have a rest. Must be about 5 o'clock, almost 5.
Right there, 4:30.
Yeah, 4:30. So, yes, thank you very much.
Make these broad sweeps.
Love it.
Good. Yeah.
Love it.
And if anybody has questions, I'm not sure if you're in touch with your audience where they can ask you questions, or if wherever you post it, I'm happy to, clarify or answer questions if that comes up.
Oh, that's great. I'll let people know that, people can, when I post this on Instagram, to let people know, I'll put it in the comments that people can ask questions or just DM me.
Yeah. Okay, great.
Yeah, cool.
Thanks so much for your good work.
And you too, Mary. Take care.
Righty. Bye-bye.
Bye.